There's a famous Hasidic story with a lung. One time the Hasidim were farbringing, in times of the Alter Rebbe. And you know how that goes with farbringings. You sit around the table, there's a lot of food and l'chaim, and at one point the food ran out. So somebody went to the Sheikh's house, the local slaughtherer's house, and he wanted to get some farbison, something to eat. So he got a lung. That's why I know that they used to eat lung. He got a lung, a roasted lung, and he brought it to the farbringen, and everybody was looking at it like so excited to eat it. So one of the Chassidim, Reb Shmuel Munkes, he took the lung and he started dancing around the table with the lung, and everyone started chasing him. And he went around the table, and then he came to the edge of the room, garbage can, and he dumped the lung in the garbage can. So everybody was super mad at him. Bal tashchit, how could you do that? We're trying to farbring over here. What are you doing? You're throwing away our food. They put him on the table to give him makot. And as they put him on the table, the wife of the shochet came running into the room, screaming, "Don't eat the lung, don't eat the lungs, a trefa." It came from a bad animal, it came from a non-kosher animal. So now everybody looked at Reb Shmuel Munkes, and they were now upset at him the other way. Like, Mata, Bal Ruach HaKodesh? Mata Oseh Shtuyot? What? How did you know? So they put him back on the table to give him lashes, because Chassidim are super humble. You don't just show your Ruach HaKodesh. So he said to them, no, I don't have Ruach HaKodesh. I don't know anything about the lung. But when it came into the room, I could see how much everybody desired it. And I myself desired it so much. I had a huge ta'ava. And I've been training myself all my life not to give in to things that I want. And since I saw that I wanted it so much, I knew inside that it had to be bad. I didn't know how, but it couldn't be kosher. So I threw it in. So that's the Chassidish Maisa about the lung. Hilchos Shechitah Perek Shmini, the laws of ritual slaughter, chapter 8. We're continuing to discuss the 8 categories of treifa, the 8 categories of mortal wounds that an animal will not be able to live from for 12 months. We already discussed 2 of them, the pounce and the puncture. Today we're going to discuss 2 more. The first one is called chasera. Chasera means missing naturally, from birth. The animal was born missing certain limbs or certain internal organs. That automatically disqualifies it and makes it treif. Says the Rambam, chasera keitzad. What is implied, what is meant by missing? Shnei evarim hein. There are 2 limbs, 2 internal organs in the animal. Sheim chaser miminyanam treifa. That if any of their proper number is missing, the animal is treifa. Now, yesterday and the day before, we learned that there are 11 limbs that if they're punctured, the animal is treif. And at the end of yesterday's chapter, the Rambam said that not only if they're punctured, but even if they're missing, they're also treif. So those are not included in this number here, because those are what's called mikol shekain. How much more so? If punctured, it makes them treif. For sure, if they're missing, it makes them treif. These 2 that we're going to learn right now are only treif if they're missing. The eluhein, they are the following: hareya v'haraglayim, the lungs and the feet. Yesterday we spent the whole chapter on punctures in the lungs. Today we're going to talk about their setup. So this was the picture that we used yesterday.
So it's part of the reya, it's not all the reya.
Yes, we're going to see. And here you see the lungs from both sides. On the left side you have what's called the top view, or the dorsal view, looking from the back of the animal. This is how you would see the lungs over the trachea. And this is what's called the ventral view. If you're looking at the animal upside down, this is how you would see it. And as we discussed, the lungs have what's called an om. The main caudal lobes are called in English. On the bottom, 2 big lobes. And then on top you have what's called the unais. The unais are the cranial lobes. 3 smaller and 2 smaller on the 2 different sides. However, the way we're going to learn the Rambam today, we're going to have to look at the lungs the opposite way. So this is the picture we used yesterday. Today we're going to go upside down. Okay? This is the same picture as was on the right. That's the ventral view. You're looking at the animal from when it's upside down. But when it's upside down, think about a cow with its legs up and its head towards you. If you're standing, this is how butchers used to cut open animals. They used to hang them by their feet and slice them open from the back to the front on the bottom of their stomach, and the whole thing would open. They could take out all the internal organs. So this was typically the way that a butcher would see the lungs when he opened an animal. On the left side, you have the way it actually looks naturally. The lungs, the way they're enclosed in the rib cage, they're held very tightly, and the whole thing looks like a kind of like a little teardrop upside down. But then, once you remove the ribs and the lungs are allowed to spread naturally, you can define, these are the two big lobes, the which we called yesterday, and these are the cranial lobes, the unois. And from this perspective, we see that there are 3 on the right and 2 on the left. Plus there's a little lobe over here in the middle. These are the ones we're going to be discussing today. It says the Rambam, v'chamesh unois yesh lareya. There are 5 lobes, and we're only speaking about the top cranial ones. We're not going to be discussing the big ones. There are 5 lobes that the lungs possess. Kishayisla oisa adam biyadai. When a person hangs an animal in his hand, in other words, suspends an animal by its legs, upnei reya keneged panav, and the face of the lung is opposite his face. In other words, he's looking down at the animal as it's turned upside down, and he's looking at the lungs. He will see shalosh min hayamin ushtayim min asmoil. That there are 3 on the right. You can see the arrows here, 1, 2, 3, and 2 on the left. That's the 1 and the 2. Uvitzad yamin mimena, also on the right side, kimay oizen kitana, is like a small lobe, a mini one. That's the one over here. Ve'ena bitzad ha'unais. It's not on the same side. In other words, it's not along the rest of the lobes. Ve'yesh la kimay kis bifnei atzma. It even has somewhat of a little pocket, a little membrane on its own. You can't see that here in the picture, but this little lobe is encased in somewhat of its own membrane. Vehi b'soicha kis, it's inside that pocket. Ve'oizen zu aktano hi anikras varda. This little lobe is called the rose, because it looks like it has the shape of a rose. Ve'ena min haminyan, but it's not part of the number of required lobes of the lungs. Lefichach, therefore, says the Rambam, im loy nimtzeis havarda. If you open up an animal and you don't find this rose, this middle lobe, it just doesn't exist, muteres, the animal is permitted. Even though we just said that one of the limbs that are lacking, chasera, make the animal treifa, is the lungs, but it's not including that little lobe, because that little lobe was not part of the number of required unos. Shekachi darka, because that's the normal way of animals. Yesh behemosh timatze bahem, veyesh behemosh lo timatze bahem. There are some animals in which the rose-like lobe is found, and some animals in which the rose-like lobe is not found. So it's permitted if it's missing. I should let you know that in the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam writes that no, if a rose-like lobe is missing, it's treif. But for the Rambam, it's kosher. V'im nimtzeis nekuva, but if it has a puncture, in other words, it's kind of funny. It doesn't have to be there in the animal. If it's missing, it's fine. But if it's there, it can't have a hole. So if it's there and it has a hole, even if its casing, its membrane, is sealing the hole, harezu treifa. The animal is treif. It's like, we don't need you here, but if you're here, we need you all the way. That's what we're saying. So I was telling Amnon this before the class, that by default, when you slaughter an animal, if you have no reason to suspect that there's a problem, you don't have to check anything. You assume it's all kosher. But all these halachot are said if, A, you decided to check. Let's say you wanted to serve the lung, and boom, you're checking the lung and you see there's a problem. Or if you observed in the animal's lifetime that it got a kind of a wound, now you have to suspect. Now you have to be worried, and now when you open it up, you got to check through every single thing and follow all these laws. But by default, otherwise, if you think about it, industrial shechitah would take forever if you had to do all this, check every single animal every single way. So we don't do a full check on every animal, only if we have reason to suspect.
But there's pressure on these guys to kind of get through the job and get as many animals.
Very true. Very true. That's why it says in our literature that a shochet has to be an extra yirah shamayim. He has to be an extra God-fearing person because there's so much pressure and so much financial loss. So much financial loss at stake. Exactly. So that's as far as this rose-like varda, this little lobe. Now let's talk about the lobes, the regular unos themselves. Chaser minyan ha'unos. If the number of lobes is lacking, v'nimtzeis achas min hasmoil l'shtayim min hayamin, and you find instead of 2 on the left side, you find only 1. Or instead of 3 on the right side, you find only 2. Treifa. The animal is treif. That's what we meant when we said in the beginning of the chapter that a missing lung is treif. It means a missing lobe in the proper place. But if you only have 2 on the right, and the rose-like lobe, then the rose-like lobe can count as one of the 3 required lobes on the right. Commentaries discuss, what if you have 1 on the left and the rose-like lobe? Can the rose-like lobe be included in the left count? And the answer is no, because it's the rose-like lobe, the varda, is always on the right, so it can count towards the cranial lobes on the right, but it cannot count towards the number of cranial lobes on the left. Halacha gimel nischalfu ha'unais. If you have the correct number of lobes, but they're inverted, benimtzu shalish min hasmoil ushtayim min hayamin beloy veret, and you have 3 on the left and 2 on the right. And it would have to be that you don't have the rose-like lobe either, because if you have the rose-like lobe, then that will count towards the 3 on the right, and you'll basically have 3 and 3, which is fine. But if you have 3 on the left and 2 on the right with no rose-like lobe, or the rose-like lobe was clearly on the left side, together with the left lobe, so it became a complete inverted version of the lungs, where you have 3 on the right plus the varda, 3 on the left plus the varda and 2 on the right. Harezu treifa, this animal is treif. Shehi chaseira mitzad yamin, because it's missing, while it has extra on the left, but it's missing on the right. This is how the Rambam interprets the word nischalfu. Inverted means the number was exchanged. Other commentaries say nischalfu means the shapes were exchanged. The number was proper, but you can see how each lobe on the right has a distinct shape. So what if the shapes got inverted? That's how other commentaries explain it, but we're going with the Rambam, that he means the number was exchanged. Halacha dalid nitoisfu ha'unais b'minyanam. What if there were extra? Not only did you have 3 on the right and 2 on the left, you had more. There were more lobes than required. So you have to look at the shape of the lobe. Im hoisa ha'oizan ha'yasera b'tzad ha'unais. If the extra lobe was along the row of the lobe, so here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, and then number 4 would be like right next to it. Oy mi lifnei hareya shehu umas halev, or on the front of the lungs, over here, opposite the heart, on the ventral side, muteris, then it's allowed. Because in either of these cases, if it's along the lobes, or at least under them, it has more of a natural look. The animal could have come this way naturally. It doesn't look like anything is superimposed on it. But if the extra lung is on the top, on the dorsal side, using this picture again, even though it's not the perspective that we're using, this is the top of the lungs. If on top of the lungs there was an extra lobe, harezu treifa. Now the animal is treif, shahayeser kicheser, because extra sometimes is like lacking. However, in order for the extra lobe to disqualify the animal, it has to be as big, at least, as a hadas, as a myrtle leaf. Smaller than that is not considered to be a lobe. It's not considered to be an extra lobe. It makes the animal, the animal still permitted. What if the lobe is small, but if you inflate it, it becomes big like a myrtle leaf? So the commentaries say that's also treif. As long as it can reach the size of a myrtle leaf, even when it's blown up, the animal is treif. Halacha he. Oizen shenimtzeis dvuka bechaverta hasmuchala. Naturally, once you take the lungs out of the rib cage, these lobes should separate, kind of each onto their own. But what if you discovered that one of the lobes was stuck to the other one? And the Rambam uses the word hasmuchala, the one next to it. So if it was the right lobes, this one would be stuck to this one, or this one would be stuck to this one. Muteres. Says the Rambam, even though sometimes adhesions, things sticking together, could mean there's a hole, here it doesn't matter. Because it's the way it naturally grows, in other words, because it's 2 that are anyways connected to each other, and they're just stuck together, it's allowed. But if they got stuck, not in the proper order, like the first one got stuck to the third one, treifa, then the animal is treif. I thought I had a picture here. Oh, yeah. See here, we're looking at the lungs from the outside. I'm not sure if you can see this pink line here. This is the first one, and this is the third one. So if the first one got stuck to the third one, That's not the natural way. Not the natural way. There's probably a bad puncture there, and it's going to soon pull apart. Not going to bring out good results. But if it's in the right order, 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, it's okay. Now the commentaries argue when the two that are next to each other are stuck together, do they have to be stuck together naturally or also unnaturally? In other words, do the cuts have to match? Or what if the first two got turned over and got stuck back to back, but it's still 1 and 2? It's still in order, but it's not what's called mechituch lichituch. It's not shape to shape. The shape don't stick together properly. They kind of stick together awkwardly. So the Rambam is interpreted to mean that as long as it's 1 and 2 in the natural order, doesn't matter which way they're stuck together. But in Shulchan Aruch he says, no, only if they're stuck together in their natural state, but not in an awkward way. And the Ramah is even stricter. He says that even if it's stuck together in the natural way, you have to check it. Make sure that there's no punctures. Anyway, that's as far as lobes that are stuck together. Halacha vav, nimtzu shtei ha'unais ke'una achas. If 2 lobes are discovered to be like one. Ve'ena nires kishtayim dvukas. They don't seem like 2 separate masses stuck together. It seems like just one mass. Im haya beinein k'mei oleh hadas. If at any point on the line combining the 2 masses, there's even the space of a myrtle leaf, bein be'ikran, bein be'emtzan, bein be'seifan, whether at their core, in other words, in the middle of the lungs, whether in the middle of the dividing line between them or at the end. As long as in some way there's a space, that you can see that it's 2 pieces stuck together, muteras, the animal is permitted. If not, it looks like literally one mass. Now the animal is missing. It doesn't have 2 lobes, it only has 1. Missing makes it treif. What if the entire lung, not just the lobes, the whole set of lungs is discovered to be 2 big masses, 2 patches? It doesn't have any cut of lobes. Not like some lobes are there and some lobes are stuck together. The whole thing is like one big ball on the right, one big ball on the left. Treifa, the animal is treif, it's missing the proper number of lobes. So too, if the body of the lung, which is reference to the umais, the big lobes, the caudal lobes, if they're missing any part, even if it wasn't punctured, it's just missing a piece, that's like lacking the number of lobes, the animal is treif. Therefore, if there's an area in the lung that's so dry that if your nail runs over it, it will crumble, that's treated like a missing lung, and the animal is treif. Even if it's the smallest amount, it doesn't matter. A lung that's discovered to be blown up, swollen, inflated, like the leaves of a palm tree. Says the Rambam, we have to forbid this animal out of doubt, because this is a weird, an unusual addition in the body. The lungs shouldn't be swollen that way. And the same way when it comes to the lobes. So just like we said by the lobes, that an extra lobe is like a missing lobe, so too, perhaps in the body of the lung itself, perhaps an addition, an extra unusual addition, should be considered like a lacking. And therefore, out of doubt, if you find the swollen lung, you have to forbid the entire animal. If an animal experienced a very traumatic experience, you can tell that it got terrified, got super afraid. To the point that its entire lung shriveled and it's almost dry. If the fear imposed upon it was a natural occurrence from heaven, for example, it heard thunder, or it saw shooting stars, and it got scared, muteres, then the animal is permitted. That's Hashem's business. But if it was a human being who caused the animal this traumatic experience, you slaughtered an animal, another animal, right in front of it, so it watched a fellow animal get killed. The resulting shrivel in the lungs that caused it to become almost dry is like a missing lung, and the animal is considered to be treif. Halacha Yud, Ketzad Beit Kenoisa. How can you check if you see a shriveled lung? You open up an animal and you see that its lungs are shriveled. what do you do to determine what kind of a fear it went through and whether it's kosher or not? So the Rambam says, you put the lung in water for 24 hours. If it was the cold time, the time of winter, you put it in warm water. In a container which the water is not going to condense around. If you have a metal container and it gets very cold, the water will begin to condense around it outside as well. It has to be a kind of container that won't condense, so the water doesn't become too cold too fast. If it was the hot time in the summertime, put it into cold water. In a container where the waters will condense from the back, which will keep the liquid colder for longer. Either way, in the winter in warm water, in the summer in cold water for 24 hours. And after 24 hours, you inspect the lung. If the lung returns to its natural state, it re-expands. You can be sure that the fear that it experienced was a heavenly natural fear, and it's permitted. If it didn't return, it didn't re-expand, then it experienced the human trauma, and it is treifa. Halacha Yud Aleph. Perhaps these pictures are not so for the faint of heart, but let's see. Behema shahisa chaseira regel b'tchilas briyasa. An animal which was missing a hind leg, a back leg. Here's the dog. It's missing one of its back legs. I couldn't find the picture of a kosher animal, but the point is one of the back, you see here, it has two front legs, but the back leg is missing. Treifa. That's a treifa. That's what the Rambam meant in the beginning of the chapter, that the raglayim, the hind legs, if they're missing, the animal is treif. And the same thing if it had an extra, again, hind leg. Here's a calf, two regular front legs, but three in the back. See? An extra foot is also treif. Shekol hayeser kecheserhu. Any additions are like subtractions. An extra leg is like a missing leg. But that's only if it's the back leg. Avalim hayula shalish yadayim. Or yad achas. But if it's the front leg, the foreleg, it had three forelegs, like this cow here. You see the 3, 1, 2, and the third one is kind of white. But it's a foreleg, or it's missing one of the forelegs. Here's a cow. This was actually born in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands a couple of years ago. This is an actual cow missing the front leg. So then, muteres. Fascinatingly, it's permitted. Forelegs don't count for the treif, only the back legs. Nechtach haregel. What if the back leg was cut at a certain point? So we're going to use this picture here from the Art Scroll Gemara to check out all these different joints. And this is a typical animal's leg. You have the hoof at the bottom. Then you have what's called the cannon bone or the metatarsus. That's over here. Then you have between these two bones, it's called in Hebrew in the halacha, arkuba tachtoina, the lower joint, in English the tarsus. Then you have the bone, shank bone, the tibia. Between that is what's called the arkuba elyoina, the upper joint. And then you have the femur, the yerech. So 3 bones, 2 joints in the middle. So the Rambam says if an animal's foot was cut, min ha'arkuba ulemaila, above the joint, treifa, that the animal is disqualified. Min ha'arkuba ulemata, muteres. From under the joint, it's permitted. Be'eza arkuba amru. Which joint are we talking about? There's 2 joints, the upper joint, the lower joint. Says the Rambam, we're talking about ba'arkuba shehu soif hayerech hasamuch laguf, the higher joint, the joint which is the end of the femur bone, closer to the body. So if an animal's leg is cut up here, treif. Lower than this, permitted. This is going to be important because of what's coming soon in the following halachot. Says the Rambam, nishbar ha'etzem l'mayla min ha'arkuba. If the animal's foot wasn't cut, but the bone was broken. The bone was broken up here, above the upper joint. Im yatsa kuloi oirube lachutz. If most of the bone, or the entire bone, came out of the body, protruded from the skin, that's like it was cut off, and it fell off, and the animal is treif. But as long as the animal's meat, or skin, hide, was covering most of the thickness and most of the circumference of the broken bone, it's permitted. Even if part of the bone that was broken totally fell off the body, as long as most of it was being covered by the animal's flesh or skin, it's okay. Begidim harakim enon chashuvin basar. Soft sinews are not considered to be flesh. If it's only covered by sinews, that's not considered covered. It has to be covered by actual meat. And now, for the next few halachot, the Rambam introduces what's called the tzoymes hagidin. Tzoymes hagidin literally means the juncture of the sinews. It's a point where a certain group of tendons meet in the animal. So first, the Rambam will describe where this tzoymes hagidin is, and then I'll explain it more in modern terms. Tzoymes hagidin, the juncture of the sinews, hein ba behema uva chaya, can be found in both animals and beasts, domesticated and non-domesticated animals, l'mayla min ha'akev, just above the heel, just above the hoof, b'makoim shetoilin b'yatabachim ha'behema, at the point where typically butchers would hang the animal to skin. And this was right here. On the metatarsus, typically, butchers would kind of drill a hole through the bone, because it was a super tough bone, and they would hang the entire animal by that bone, and then you can skin the animal super easily. Ve'hein shleisha gidin levanim, they are made up of 3 veins, 3 tendons, 3 white tendons. Echad ave ushnayim dakim, one is thick, and 2 are thinner. Umimakim sheyaschil, ve'hein kashim ulevanim, from the point where they begin, tough and white, ad sheyasor halayven mehen v'yaschilu lihis adim ulihis rakech, until the whiteness is removed and they begin to turn reddish and softer. Hu tzaymes hagidim. That whole area is called the juncture of the sinews. V'hu ka'irach sheshet tzrei basher. In a typical ox, it's 16 finger breadths. So basically, it goes like this. Tendons, the job of tendons, and even in the human beings and also in animals, are there to fasten the muscle to the bone. And this way the bone can move when the muscle contracts. So the tendons that we're talking about are the tendons that attach the middle leg muscles to the bone of the lower leg. So the muscles up here to this bone down here. And so what happens is like this. At this point of the animal, by the metatarsus, there is no meat. There's just bone surrounded by skin. The tendons begin down here by the hoof. See where they're white? They begin to go all the way up, and they gradually go further and further from the bone till they reach the specific muscle which they're supposed to be attached to. And if you're familiar with anatomy, so I wrote it down over here using the Art Scroll Gemara's reference here, that the commonly accepted opinion of which tendons these are Rashi's opinion, as understood by the Mordechai and the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, that they are the attachments of the caudal tibial muscle and the long digital flexor muscle. Check it up on Google. It's fascinating. These are the 2 thinner ones. You see the 2 thin ones back here? And the thicker one is the Achilles tendon. The back one. So all 3 tendons are on the back of the leg. The Ravid, who was one of the primary commentators on the Rambam as well, and I think it's the same Ravid because there were 3 different Ravids in Jewish history, but he takes a huge issue with this interpretation. He believes that Tzoymes Hagidin, this whole discussion is in the front of the leg, not the back of the leg. But the accepted opinion is from Rashi, and the Rambam seems to adopt it as well, that it's the one thicker tendon, which is the Achilles tendon, and then these 2 thinner ones, which are the caudal tibial and the digital flexor muscle. These are the 3 that we're talking about. And they go up, and as they hit past the lower joint over here in the shank bone, they're already becoming red because they're becoming really part of the meat, part of the flesh. So it's basically only this area that's called the Tzoymes Hagidin, just above the lower joint, just above the tarsus, all the way to the hoof. That's in an animal. Halacha Yudalid uminyan gidim elu ba'oif. If you were talking about a bird, the Tzoymes Hagidin, the juncture of the sinews, is actually not 3 tendons, but rather shisha asar gidin. You can see here on the drumstick, what we call a drumstick of a chicken typically, there are actually 16 different tendons. And they also cover pretty much the same amount of space. Tchilasan min ha'etzem shel mata me'etzba yesera. They begin at the bone just below the extra foot. Every kosher bird, as we learned in the beginning of the laws of kosher food, has an extra little talon sticking out of the back. And here you can see more of the skeleton. So right over here, right under the extra toe, right here is where the sinews begin. And according to the Rambam, the way it's worded here, it goes ad soif haregel shehu osoi kaskasim, up until the end point of the foot where it's covered by crusted scales. You ever see chicken feet? They have that little smooth, scaly substance on them. So typically you only see them go till this joint here. But really, even though it's covered by feathers, those crusted scales continue even further up. So the simple text of the Rambam says that Tzoymes Hagidin, according to for a bird, will basically go from here all the way till up here. And the Ravid writes on this piece of Rambam, he says, Chidush Gadol Shalei Shamati K'moisei. He says, a huge novelty, I've never heard anything like it. And many commentators take issue with the Rambam. How could it be that in an animal, in the previous picture, where's the previous picture? In the animal, it should only go till just above the lower joint, right? Only in this bone. And then in a bird, it should go way higher up to the second joint. The Talmud says that the place of the bird's Tzoymes Hagidin is the same place as the animal's Tzoymes Hagidin. And therefore, they actually want to amend the Rambam. I say the Rambam never said this. He never wrote this last line. That for a bird, it's actually the same amount. It goes up to the first joint, not to the second joint. And in fact, we have in our possession a tshuva, a response that the Rambam wrote to Chachmei Provence. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's this little corner region in France. They actually asked the Rambam this question. And he wrote, I never meant to say this. If it was misinterpreted, it was misinterpreted. The proper interpretation of this halacha should be that it's simply more tendons than an animal. Animal, it's 3 tendons, here it's 16. But they extend to the same exact place, up to just above the first joint. In an animal, that's the tarsus, and the chicken, whatever it's called over there, this first little bone. Anyway, that's the introduction of what the Tzoymes Hagidin is. Now, why is it important to know what it is? Because there are special laws that apply if this juncture of sinews was cut. Says the Rambam, Behema shenechtechu ragleha, bimkoim Tzoymes Hagidin. If an animal was cut, its feet were cut, in the place of the juncture of the sinews, treifa, then the animal is treif. So right here, the animal gets a cut, this juncture of sinews is snapped, the animal is treif. Now, says the Rambam, Va'al tisma v'toimar. Don't wonder and ask me the obvious question. Keitzad techasech lemayla mitzaymes hagidim v'hi muteres. You just told me, I just told you, that if the animal's leg is cut off way above this juncture, all the way up to the upper joint, the animal's foot is cut right over here, the animal is actually permitted. Until it's cut above the upper joint, only over here is the animal treif. But if the animal is cut over here, it's totally fine. And now you're telling me, if the animal's foot is cut down here, where the juncture of the sinews is, that's going to make it forbidden. How does that make sense? You would think the more you cut off of the leg, the worse off the animal is. Here you're telling me, if the animal's cut here, it's treif, here it's permitted, but here it's also treif. It says that Rambam Shabbat Treifa is techasech mikan v'tichio mikan v'tamus. That's how the laws of treifas work. They're unusual. Animal is cut here and it lives, it's cut here and it dies. When the juncture of the sinews, when the Tzoymes Hagidin is cut, the animal is not becoming forbidden because it has a cut foot. It's simply because those tendons were cut. And those tendons are integral to the animal's life. Their cut is included in the list of treifas, as will be explained. So having talked about this, now we're going to move on to the second category of treifa being discussed in this chapter, which is the netula. Netula means not missing from birth, but it was removed manually. Netula, Keitzad, says that Rambam, what is meant by the treifa of removed? Shloisha ivarim hein, there are 3 limbs, sheim nitlu treifa, that if they were removed from the animal is treif. And even though if they had a puncture, it's fine, and if they're missing, it's fine, doesn't matter. If they're removed manually, they're treif. The Elohen, they are the following 3. Tzoymes Hagidim, again, the juncture of the tendons, right over here. If this stuff is taken out by a person, the animal is treif. The Hakaveh, the liver. Ulechi ha'elyon, and the upper jaw. And we're going to go through each one. Ukvar b'yarnu, we already explained, shebehema shenechtach ragla. That if an animal's foot was cut, or a bird's foot was cut at the point of the juncture of the sinews, it doesn't become a treifa because the animal is cut, only because the tendons were cut. It's the tendons that are the problem. Therefore, if somebody managed to surgically just cut the sinews and the foot was left intact, it's still a treifa. It's still problematic. Shaharei nitla tzeimes hagidim, because effectively when you cut off the juncture, you've removed it. Even if you kept the animal's whole bone beautifully intact, but you removed the tzeimes hagidim, problem. Nechtach ba'behema ha'echad ha'avel levadai. Now, this tzeimes hagidim is made up of 3 tendons. So what if only the thick one, the Achilles one, was cut? Muteres, the animal is still permitted. Shaharei nisharu shnayim, because you have a majority, you have 2, even though they're thinner. Nechtechu ashnayim adakin muteres. If the 2 thin ones, the long digital flexor and the cardial tibial, were cut, the animal is also permitted, muteres. Because the Achilles, the thick one, is bigger than them both combined. And so you haven't removed the whole juncture, only a minority. So either way, you come down good. But if the majority of every one of the 3 was cut, then it's treifa. And for sure, if they were all cut, if they were all taken out, then it's for sure problematic. When it comes to a bird, more tendons to go around. Some texts have kol echad. We're going to go with echad. Even if the majority of just one of the 16 tendons was cut, treifa, the animal is treif. It's much easier to become a treifa for a bird than for the animal. Halacha chaf, if a bird's wings were broken, mutar, that's permitted. Like an animal whose 4 legs were cut. Only hind legs are a problem. 4 legs are not a problem, so for the bird also, only its legs, not its wings. Halacha chaf aleph, kavet. Let's discuss the liver. This is the zoomed out picture of the liver. Again, here's you can see the this is the gallbladder, this is the liver, yeah. This is the picture where it's taken from. This is the whole right side of the cow. And we're zooming in to the middle where the liver is. So the Rambam says, kavet shenitla kula, if the entire liver was removed, treifa, the animal is treif. If most of it was removed, but even an olive-sized portion in the place where it's attached to the muscle, and an olive-sized portion near the gallbladder remains, harezu muteres, the animal is still permitted. Only if it's entirely removed, it's problematic, but if one kazayas here, one kazayas up here remains, it's fine. If the liver was dislodged, but it's still attached to the diaphragm, which is this piece of meat here, this partition of muscle between the abdominal cavity and the thorax, the breathing area. So it's dislodged, but it's still attached somewhat. Mutares, the animal is permitted because it hasn't been removed. If conversely, you only took out the place where it's attached to the muscle and the place where it's near the gallbladder, even if the rest is fully intact, treif, then it's treif. Because the operative parts of the liver are the point where it's attached to the greater arteries and the point where it's attached to the gallbladder. So if those parts are out, the whole thing is treif. But halacha chav beis, the Rambam repeats the point. Nishar ba kazayas b'm kaimaro, kazayas b'makim sheitliya by kshera. If there's an olive-sized portion of the place of the gallbladder and up top where it's attached to the arteries, it is kosher, but only if it's specifically in those places. Aval haya mufuzar ma'at bekan, but if it's all spread out, the amount of liver that's remaining, a little here, a little there, oisha haya merudad, or if it was flattened, oisha haya arich kiritzua, or it was elongated like a strap, harezu safek, in these cases it's a doubt. V'yira lishi asura, and it seems to me that it's forbidden. Says the Rambam, now the third limb is the lechi ha'elyon. Where's my picture of the upper jaw? Oh, right here. This is the right side of the cow. This is the lower jaw, the bone under the teeth. And then you have the upper jaw. So the Rambam says, lechi ha'elyon shenital treifa. If the upper jaw was removed, the animal is treif. Aval im nital hatachton. But if the lower jaw was removed, it was just scraped down all the way till where the pipes are, the windpipe and the food pipe, and they weren't dislodged. Only the upper jaw was removed. Harezu muteres, this is permitted. And this halacha aroused also a controversy, because in the Talmud, only the lower jaw is mentioned and not the upper jaw. Upper jaw is not mentioned at all. And many people asked the Rambam, how could you write this? It doesn't say it anywhere in the Talmud. The Tur writes astonishingly on the Rambam. The Seder said only 70 wounds are treif. The Rambam's adding, So there's a whole response, a whole tshuva where the Rambam explains the science behind this. He says if the upper jaw is removed, then it interrupts the flow of breathing for the animal. Too much air will come into the animal's system, and on the same day it's going to die. And therefore he said that because the fact on the ground tell me that it's going to die, so I listed it in the treifas. Why is it not mentioned in the Talmud? So the Rogachover Gaon explains that it's because it's a different type of treifa. Usually treif wounds that are in the Talmud are wounds that will directly kill the animal. Here, removing the upper jaw won't directly kill the animal. It's because after you remove the upper jaw, the air is going to come in, and too much air, that's going to kill the animal. So as long as the wound itself isn't what's killing the animal, it doesn't make the list in the Talmud. For the Rambam, because it's halacha, he also has to include the upper jaw. Halacha chaf dalid, kol eiver shenoi marboy. Any limb about which we said, sheim haya chaser treifa, that if it was removed, that if it was missing naturally, it's treif. Kachim nital treifa. So too, if it was removed, it's also treif. Aval eiver shenoi marboy nital treifa. But if a limb, we said that only if it's removed, it's treif. Eina ne'aseres elim nechtach oisei eiver. It's only forbidden if that limb was cut out. Avalim nivres chaseira oisei eiver. But if it was created missing that limb, harezum muteres, the animal is permitted. So if it was naturally missing the upper jaw or the liver, it's kosher. Because if you don't say that, the two categories of missing and removed are the same thing. So obviously, something that's treif because it's removed is only treif on that count, not if it's born missing. Any limb about which we said that if it's removed, it's permitted. For sure, if it's missing from the beginning of its creation and it wasn't created with that limb, then it's for sure permitted. It says that if an animal's uterus was removed, and you can see that over here on the top left of the animal. This is the uterus of the animal right here. The womb, or the kidneys were removed. And the kidneys, we see them on this picture, and back and forth, up here. Here are the kidneys in the middle of the animal. So if the womb or the kidneys were removed, the animal is permitted. Therefore, if the animal was created with 1 or 3 kidneys, muteres, it's also permitted. Also, if the kidney got a puncture, muteres, it's permitted. Now, even though a kidney that's removed or missing is permitted, if it's found to be super small, by small we mean if it's a small animal, the size of a lima bean. If it's a bigger animal, the size of a grape. Treifa, it's too small, then it's treif. Also, if it got a wound, it got some kind of a disease in it, it becomes like dead meat, decomposes after a couple of days. That if you hold on to part of it, the rest will crumble. And this sickness reached even the white inside the kidney. Remember from the laws of the forbidden fats, the kidney around is red and inside has a little bit of a bunch of white substance. So if even this white was affected with this disease, harezu treifa, and the animal is treif. Similarly, if you find inside the kidney, you find pus. Even if it's not disgusting, putrid, or liquid, murky water or putrid water was found in the kidney, harezu treifa, then it's treif. But if inside the kidney you find clear water, harezu muteres, the animal is still permitted, it's not affected by a mortal disease.